last night. The audience last night was heavily biased to the younger side. And so I think it's okay if I give the same introduction tonight that I gave last night. Some of you may have Googled our speakers, but I say they're really extraordinary human beings. And they have one fault, which is that they're much too self-effacing. So I'd like you to know a bit more about them. Barbara Ettinger has proved herself, without any doubt, to be a major director of documentaries and a documentary filmmaker. She received an MS in education from Stanford University, but her affection for photography really dates from high school, and that continued after her BA when she went to the International Center of Photography in New York City. And her interest there expanded into filmmaking, and her first was in 1990. Documentaries became the focus at the same time. Her major successes are Martha and Ethel, the first one, in 1995. This was picked up by Sony Pictures Classic and distributed worldwide. Her second one in 2006 is called 2 Square Miles. It's the story of a community's fight against a cement plant. And this one aired on PBS. The third one is A Sea Change. That appeared in 2009. And that so far has been shown in 34 countries in 8 languages. The debut of that film was in the United States, in the auditorium in the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. And they thought that that's such a large room that they had no possibility of filling it, and if they got 100, 150 people, they would be doing well. Well, they got 750 to 800 people, and there were people waiting outside who couldn't get in. Now, Barbara is on the fourth film called, temporarily anyway, Accidental Success. So you should look for this when it is first distributed. Sven, after graduating in history at Yale, well, first he comes from Ballard High School in 1961, then Yale as a history major. His first teaching appointment was the Putney School in Vermont. And unlike most Americans moving from job to job every so often, he stayed there until 1995. He became headmaster in 1989. And I have met some students of Sven's, and the way they talk about him validates the way I think about him. Then he worked for the Student Conservation Association as a major gift officer, and there he was discovered by Barbara and Sven agreed to work at the Native American prep school, which was founded by Barbara and her father in New Mexico. So the bottom line in this story is that he married his horse. They now live in the Hudson River Valley. And we saw the film last night, and tonight you hear the story of the film by two people who are extraordinary and who are committed and who have very high standards. So Sven and Barbara, welcome once again.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure for us to be here, and I suspect that some of you, if you're Seattle natives, know a little bit how I feel coming back 50 years later. In fact, I'm coming back to Seattle in August for my 50th high school reunion. It's always a treat to be back. Seattle has changed in so many ways, and in so many ways it hasn't changed. And it remains a special, special part of who I am, and I thank you, Seattle. What we would like to do today is to try to get you to understand a good deal of the process that we go through creatively, intellectually, in making a film of this type, taking on the challenge of how do you talk to a broad audience about something that's rooted in science. So we will begin by talking about why we decided to make this film, how we proceeded to make this film, and even share enough detail so if there are aspiring filmmakers or filmmakers already out there, maybe there will be some hints that will be helpful and useful. It will be about creative challenges, it will be about financial challenges, and finally it will be about what do you do after you produce the film and when you realize you're only halfway there because you also have to distribute the film. So Barbara, you want to talk about how we got into this in the first place?
I'd also just like to begin by saying, even though I wasn't brought up here or raised here or even spent that much time here, I feel very much as if it's home. And we have an extended family, and 4 of those extended family members are here with us right now, all 4 of whom we met through the process of making this film. And I would just like to take a brief moment to acknowledge them. Brad Warren is sitting right there. We've got Ed Miles, who was instrumental in helping us out. Chris Sabine is sitting in the back with Dick Feely, who managed to get himself here despite having had broken his leg in 2 places from one of those freak airplane accidents where he was thrown to the ground. I can't even describe it, it's so horrific. But Dick, we love you, we're happy you're here, and thank you for making the effort to come. So that is one of the wonderful benefits, side benefits of filmmaking, is that you get very close and attached to the people that you work closely with. So here we were making a film about scientists, which initially horrified me at any rate, because science was not a field that I was particularly strong in. And now I can embrace scientists and say that they are certainly amongst my very best friends. So I'm going to chat a little bit about how we came to decide to make this film in the first place. And it's very random and rather arbitrary, actually, and I think this is the way many filmmakers work. We had just finished making a film about a cement plant battle in the Hudson Valley. It was a protracted battle that lasted about 6 years. It was a very small community that was fighting to prevent a coal-fired cement plant from being built a mile from the local hospital. And it turned out to be basically our local community about 10 miles up the road. So we worked very hard, 24/7, for about 5 years on this particular film, which I'm happy to say the good guys won the battle. and it was shown on PBS, so all turned out very well for us, but we were tired. And we had decided between ourselves, and Sven has been begging me to retire now for quite a few years, and I always go along with him and say, yeah, sure, we'll retire, whatever you want to do. But, and so one morning we're talking about retirement plans, and this is only about 3 weeks after we had finished the film and decided never to make another one again. And we're lounging around reading magazines, and I picked up a copy of the New Yorker magazine and read the very alarming article written by Elizabeth Colbert called The Darkening Sea. And I don't know how many people here have read that article. Yeah, just a brilliant, effective article. And immediately upon reading it, you know, I became very dark and silent and just gave Sven the copy and said, read this. So he read it as well. And we turned to each other and said, this is an issue that it's huge. I wonder who is communicating this. The New Yorker, it's a beautiful article, but it has limited readership. This is obviously a global issue. People need to be educated about it in order to take action. So we got on Google and Googled ocean acidification, hoping, praying that we would find that some wonderful filmmaker was out there, had already started to make this film, so that we could sit back and relax. And of course, only 6 citations on a single page came up under ocean acidification. There was absolutely nothing at all that suggested that there was an effort to communicate this any further than the New Yorker magazine. So we turned to each other and said, you know, I hate to say this, but I think we're going to have to swing into action again. But before we did that, we thought, well, we really can't unless we make the proper connections. So one of the citations on Google was actually Dick Feely, who was about to hold a conference here in Seattle at the UW, wasn't it? Well, the second conference was at the UW. This was at NOAA. And we Googled his name and telephone number, called it. We love Google. Google is a major theme in the film as well. But it had his telephone number. We called Dick Feely. He called us back immediately. We explained that we were filmmakers and that we understood that this was a serious issue, but we really needed to learn more about it. We're skeptical. We don't believe every article, even if it is written by Elizabeth Colbert. Could it really be that bad? We couldn't imagine that it would be. And he said, please come on out to this meeting. We'd love to invite you to attend, and you know, we will help you out in any way that we can. So we flew out immediately, attended the meeting, and immediately saw that this indeed was a very, very pressing, very serious issue. And we were able to meet with some of the scientists who were involved in the latest research. There were also some journalists and some writers present. So we had an opportunity to speak to a variety of people. Brad, who was in the fishing industry, representing the fishing industry. And we soon learned, that this was an issue that had to be communicated quickly and effectively. And also that there were a group of scientists who were ready to help us. And this was, I think, probably our first lesson in working with scientists, was that they told us right away, we as scientists are not communicators. That is not our job. We do research, and we have our heads down. We're working very hard, but we don't have access to communicators, and we need communicators. We need people who can really assist us in talking about the research that we're doing and the very important evidence and issues that we're confronting. So we got the red light, the green light, sorry, from the scientists, unfortunately not the red light. And with that we went home prepared to begin to make this movie. Our first stop after that was to go visit with Elizabeth Colbert. She had written this beautiful article. She inspired us. She had created a lot of portraits that we thought we might be able to draw from, use some of those characters. And we went to visit her, and one of the first things she said to us was, you know, this is going to be very challenging. It's not easy to make a film about a pteropod. We thought, ooh, you're right. Making a film about a pteropod and working with scientists, this is going to be a challenge. So we began to think, all right, you know, we're going to tackle both of those, the scientists, because people are very nervous about science and scientists. I think everybody here, as a scientist, understands that the larger world out there is intimidated by you. Most young people have questionable experiences in science classes. They're a little bit nervous when they get to class, and they quickly forget the information afterwards. So we have a history in this country, unfortunately, of not successfully educating our students in science and actually kind of intimidating them. So we knew that we were going to have to make a film that would get beyond that, which meant it had to be highly entertaining. And we knew that we had to establish a connection with the scientists and with the pteropods. So how were we going to do that? The scientists, we decided we were going to film in more relaxed environments, get them out of formal environments, film scientists outside, even with their children if possible, to prove that scientists are human too. So you'll see, or you have seen in the film, we take a lot of long walks on the beach where the scientists can just unwind and relax and speak in a much more conversational tone. And we have, I guess, one or two who do experiments, because that's the other very effective way of communicating, is by doing a simple but very visual experiment. So we have a couple of rather striking experiments in the film that really stay with the viewer and make a very important scientific point. The pteropods, I won't say were more challenging, but we had to put a few more elements together to make the pteropod our poster child, which is eventually what we did do. Pteropods, as probably everybody here knows, are visually very beautiful. They have those delicate snails-like shells, and they have these lovely, delicate gossamer wings, and they just drift through the ocean in a rather magical and mythical way. So if you take that creature and you have a character saying, "Oh my God, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," and you have music playing in the background, all of a sudden you have created a character out of the pteropod. Not only a character, but a character that everybody cares about. And then they learn, after they fall in love with them, that these are the creatures that are the most vulnerable in terms of ocean acidification and the effect on the creatures that live underwater. So the learning process speeds up because everybody now is terribly fond of pteropods. They're very concerned about them, and they want to go with Sven on this journey to find out why are these pteropods being affected and what can be done about them. And of course we had to create the story around all of these, the scientists and the pteropods and the love for pteropods. And how do you do that? How do you then launch on a journey, into a journey that isn't just talking to scientists and having talking heads, which is always deadly in a film, you can't do that. And I thought, okay, we have to have a story. We've got to decide who is going to tell this story and what's your reason for going on the journey. And I thought, all right, ideally, our character should be from a culture or a background that is closely associated with fish and with the ocean. And it would be lovely if they were connected in two ways, economically and also mythologically. It would be best if their culture was really entwined with the legends of the sea, so that this person was not only anxious about the economic component, but his own history and his own culture is threatened. And they want to be able to hand this culture, this history down to the next generation. Plus, it would be better if this person was slightly older so that this person could remember the sea in its purest form and would know exactly what he was missing as they're watching the degradation of the oceans and the issues that we're confronting. And of course, finally, wouldn't it be divine if we could find somebody who had just the most charming grandson in the world? And this is literally how this happened. And I'm like going through these things, and I turned to my husband, and I said, "That's you." And I happily, he's game, having been a teacher, he's very, very good in front of the public. He's very articulate, very eloquent, and he's quite charming, she said, objectively. So Sven becomes the character and the person who tells the story. And his reason for wanting to tell the story is because of his lovely grandson, our lovely grandson, and his very true and sincere concern for what the future is going to bring to our grandson. And we thought, gee, you know, ideally every grandfather would love to do this. And what would they, what shape would this take? Every grandfather would love to go on a fact-finding mission. They want to get to the bottom of it, and they want to be able to talk to the people with the answers. And that, of course, is why we went directly to the scientists. It's one of the reasons. Another reason we went directly to the scientists is more of a cinematic reason, and that's because I'm sure everybody here saw Inconvenient Truth, which is a marvelous movie that communicated critically important information. But the feedback from that film ranged from, it's a film about graphs, to, you know, it is a film told by a man whose ego is too large and communicated inaccurate information. So we thought we are going to avoid inaccuracies by going straight to scientists. And I think that has worked very, very well for us and for the film. And we've actually been thanked by more conservative people in our audience for not following Al Gore's model, but literally going and getting the facts straight from the scientist's mouth. So it's really critical for the scientists in here to participate in films like this in order to avoid the kinds of misrepresentations that can happen if that information is coming secondhand. And, you know, another briefly very important element was to try to, Maya Lin said it so beautifully in the film when she was wondering or asking, why is it that people don't think about the oceans? Why is it they don't think about what's underneath the surface of the water? And she said, you know, it's because people don't see it. And what you don't see, you pollute. What you don't see, you don't think about. It isn't even in your mind. It's not in your memory. You don't consider it. So we thought this is another thing that's critically important to do. We have got to make our audience fall in love with the life under the sea. And Jacques Cousteau certainly did that beautifully for years and years with the journeys he would take under the sea, but Jacques Cousteau has been unfortunately absent for too long a period of time. So we tried to use some of Jacques Cousteau's love for what he bore witness to underwater. And what we tried to do was imply that what we see up here above the water is hardly any different than what there is underneath the water. And Maya Lin explains this beautifully in one section. She says, when I see fish swimming under the sea, she said they look just like birds that are flying in the sky, and they have the same patterns, the same rhythms, the same motions as birds that are flying and diving into the sea to eat the fish. And you begin to really, again, with the help of a little bit of music, you really begin to establish that relationship between what's above and what's below, and you realize there isn't a dividing line. Get rid of that dividing line of the sea and realize that it's all one. It is all one surface, and every bit of life is as precious as the next. So we try to do that visually, we try to do that with music, and I think we succeeded in bringing the ocean and ocean life much closer to the audience as a result. I think I'm talking a little bit too much here. Oh yeah, and of course Elias's role was very, very important in the film as well. First of all, we wanted this to be a film that would reach a very broad audience. One of the things that every filmmaker asks themselves is, who is the audience going to be? And in some cases, you can really narrow it down quite a bit to a kind of a small and very specific group of people. A film like this, we didn't want to narrow it. We wanted to keep it as broad and as wide as possible because, again, this is an issue that everybody needs to know about. Every generation, everybody around the world needs to know about ocean acidification. So Elias, of course, becomes the hope for the future, the longing for the past, and he also becomes the breather. When you're showing information that is so intense and so dark and so difficult, you have to respect your audience, and you have to understand your audience is going to need a break every now and then. or they're going to leave the theater screaming. We don't want them to do that. So every 10 minutes, basically, we return back to Elias, on the ocean, exploring, in the aquarium, and that's to give the audience, number one, a chance to just breathe and digest what they've learned, and also to feel that wonderful sense of wonder again that we all felt when we were children, that we all felt when we went out to the ocean for the first time and saw a whale or a dolphin in the distance. And the more we can conjure those feelings, then the deeper the attachment is going to be of the audience, not only to Elias, but to the experience of the ocean and the sea. So a major part of the balancing act that we did was to share this information about ocean acidification, what it was, and balance it with developing an increased love and awareness for everything that exists under the waterline. Sven, do you want to check there?
So what we hoped we would accomplish was really to make a film that on one level was a love story. It was a love story between a grandfather and his grandson. It was a love story for the sea. We did not shoot the underwater footage in the film. We purchased outtakes from the Blue Planet series from the BBC. There are many ways to put pieces of film together. But, you know, the real challenge for me, I'm not a filmmaker, I'm a retired educator, but also someone who's been an environmental activist for the last 45 years. And my concern, as we wrote down together on a 3x5 card when we started this process, was how can we make a film about ocean acidification that is so creatively done that it engages an audience in a way that brings ocean acidification into the public discourse. And can we make it so well that it has a life to have a broad impact in this country and beyond our borders? That was our goal. My sense was if you can't write your mission on a 3x5 card, you probably haven't thought it through fully. And the reality really is that once you finish the production of the film, you're only halfway there. It used to be that the process was a bit like when Barbara made her first film, and that was that if you made a good one, there would be a major distributor like Sony Pictures Classics standing there at Sundance to grab the film and put it on the road and get it into theaters and generate an impact. Those times are history. Now you can count on the fingers of one hand the documentary films that have had that kind of life in the last 5 to 8 years. And so our sense was that we were going to have to budget for ways of having a cash flow so that we could continue to fund pushing the film outward. Upon completion, right after it's premiered in Washington, D.C., we were approached by the Discovery Channel. They bought the film, and they have screened it multiple times on the strand they have called Planet Green. We realized that television only touches a very limited audience, and how could we go beyond that? We thought that perhaps it would be attractive to work up and down the coast. Where could we touch people, perhaps not at the grassroots, but at the grass tops, because they might have more immediate influence. So we said, why don't we screen it at yacht clubs up and down the East Coast and the West Coast? If you own a yacht, you probably make a little more noise than the average person. We have done a lot of visits to yacht clubs and many screenings, and it's been fascinating because these are not necessarily environmentally friendly audiences. I pray I'm not speaking ill of any yachtsmen here, on the contrary. But it's been a wonderful dialogue with that audience. We've also shown it at colleges, at high schools, at junior high schools, at elementary schools. film was picked up by Interfaith Power and Light, which is an organization out of San Francisco that does curriculum for discussions in churches. And the film is moving across the country to church audiences. We tried to screen it through NGOs, at aquariums, in science museums. We're always looking for new ideas, new thoughts on how that can occur. We were fortunate, we were picked up early by an educational distributor, Bullfrog Films, and they have been placing the film in these various venues. In addition to that, an international distributor, Films Transit, picked up the film, and they are responsible for trying, it's a hard sell, to get it on national television networks abroad. And to date, the film on national television is screened in Norway multiple times. It has screened in South Korea, and it was purchased last month by Globosat, the television network famous for its soap operas in Brazil, to screen there. The film having had a tremendous success in Brazil, where it's won film festivals with real money for prizes, lots of money, which has sustained ongoing outreach. We just had an email today from Colombia in South America, and they want to get the film down there. Again, we're getting it on television and using it at film festivals. We were very fortunate to be asked by Scripps, as part of the University of California system, to participate as accredited delegates to COP15 in Copenhagen in December 2009. And while COP15 didn't accomplish what many people going there had hoped, we were part of a group that included Dick Feely and Brad Warren from the audience in pushing very hard to get oceans on the agenda for COPs going forward. Oceans were not put on the agenda at the time of the Kyoto Accords and had not been able to get on the table since. And I'm delighted to report that they were put on the table, on the agenda, and were in that location at COP16 in Cancun this last year. But while there, several things happened that just, kept this ball rolling. One was that we were told by people we met that we had to get this message out to the BRIC countries. And in economic terms, when we speak of the BRIC countries, you're talking about Brazil, you're talking about Russia, India, and China, BRIC. So that's why we've made this huge effort in Brazil as the first phase of trying to spread this message in those countries. And the reason they're important is they're all significant producers or major producers. China has now passed the United States as the largest CO2 producer in the aggregate in the world. And this needs to be part of the public discourse there as well. I continue to yearn to find more relaxed ways to spend my Medicare years, and it's not happening quickly. And I suspect that in the back of the room, Dr. Feely may have a part to play in this, but I found myself just over a year ago asked to be on the Ocean Acidification Task Force of ORAP, which is the Ocean Research and Resources Advisory Panel to the Intergovernmental Working Panel on Ocean Acidification in Washington, D.C. And it's been fascinating because I work a lot in the foundation world, and we are really trying to take on the challenge of how can we coordinate the efforts of the foundation sector in their funding around ocean acidification with what the government is doing in such a way that we can be more strategic in the way we use what limited resources we have. And the hopes is that we are going to be able to move successfully in that direction. Those efforts continue, and I wish I could report major progress. It's a challenge to coordinate and get collaboration between foundations. It's a bit like herding cats. But the government is certainly, in terms of EPA, NASA, NOAA, and the National Science Foundation, reaching out to try to create that level of collaboration. And it's very exciting and could be very important for the research community. I think from our point of view, we are coming to the end of this journey in terms of actively being involved with film. But we're delighted to report that it has taken on a life of its own in this journey. And our dream is not only that the film will continue to be alive and well, but what we really yearn for, as I look around the audience and see students, is that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of you may be interested in standing with one foot in the world of science and perhaps taking a few steps also into science communication, especially through the medium of film. We are so eager to pass this baton, and I would just like to throw it out there and have someone catch it. I think that we live in a world today, as we move into the 21st century, where traditional forms of communication are weakening, that a visual form of communication has exploded in our midst over the last 10 to 20 years, and that it's incumbent on us in terms of literacy, in terms of persuasion, that we hone our skills in multiple messaging mediums. And I think that this is something that is sort of a challenge being thrown at all of us who care about these issues. So if there's one point that we hope we can leave everyone with, it is to give serious consideration to what role you might find challenging, interesting, engaging in perhaps picking up that baton. We get asked again and again, when everything else is sort of said, how do you make these films? How do you pay for these films? How do you go about that? And I only throw it out because it can be a helpful tool, because for many, that's a huge obstacle. How am I going to make a film? How am I going to fund it? And what we do is we become a project of a 501c3. We look for an organization that has tax-exempt status. Usually you can find them on the internet with the last suffix .org. And we try to find one that is aligned with our concerns and what particular film is about. We made this film, The Sea Change, with an organization called Sailors for the Sea. As a project of that organization, we then have a tax-free umbrella, as it's called, and we go out to organizations that are concerned about environmental matters, and particularly environmental matters in the sea, and we say, here is an issue, and we think it's critically important that people understand this better, and these are the reasons why we think you should support us. And you have to be able to communicate that in really no more than 2 pages. They prefer 1 page. There's one major foundation in New York that supported us, and their attitude is keep it short. We decide whether or not we're going to give you a grant, the amount of that grant, and then we divide that number by the number of pages of your application. And that's the amount of money you get. So that application was 3/4 of one page, and we got the grant. But it forces you to be quite succinct and pithy and to the point. We were very fortunate. We raised the $665,000 for the film through approximately 10 grants. And I must say, it makes the filmmaker's life much better. It makes your ability to sustain a positive relationship much better. You don't have to max out your credit cards. When you finish production of the film, you have no debt. You probably should have incorporated expenditures for outreach in that original budget. We didn't do that very well. So you have to go back and raise more money. But the advantage of doing it with a 501c3 umbrella organization is that you can go into that foundation sector. So if there are any of you that are filmmakers or aspiring filmmakers or people who feel this might be interesting, please keep that in mind. The other thing that we would strongly encourage anyone who is looking at messaging and communication around science issues is try to learn sort of the organizational networks in this country and which organizations are really able to make things happen. And I'll name a few that might not strike you right off as activist organizations. One, the Garden Club of America. Garden Clubs of America. Two, Trout Unlimited. Three, AARP. These are ones that have large audiences. They have, I believe, the magazine with the largest circulation in the United States today. The garden clubs are made up of strong-minded, dedicated, smart members, mostly women, who once they decide to act on something, you better get out of the way. Trout Unlimited, the same way, just terrific organizations. So we haven't fully tapped into all of those resources yet. We will continue to work on that. PTAs are other organizations, again, nationally based, that you can get a message out through. So think broadly when you're doing those things. Barbara?
One of the things we're always asked is, how did this film and the making of the film change our lives personally? Did it change the way we live? Yes, it changed our lives in many profound ways. Obviously, when we look at the ocean, we look at it with a completely different set of eyes. But in addition to that, we immediately went home after making the film, and we live in an old farmhouse that was built in 1848. But we completely insulated that house upon finishing the film. We sold our gas-guzzling car and we bought a Prius. We took out all of the light bulbs and replaced them with fluorescent lights. We installed a substantial array of solar panels. We have a pool at home. We ripped out the heater. It's now a very cold pool. But, you know, we recognized that clearly if we were going to talk the talk, we had to walk the walk, and we're very happy that we do, to the extent that we do. We do still fly a lot, but we do buy carbon credits whenever we do fly, and we did that while we were making the film. We tried to take as many initiatives as we could to be aware of our carbon footprint. We not only paid for the carbon credits for flying, but we also tried to rent Priuses whenever we could. And when we were traveling with our crew, we tried to fit everybody into one vehicle, which was pretty funny, actually. And we traveled with about a crew of 9, and an enormous amount of equipment. So that was difficult. It was a circus-like act. And we would try to find hotels that were very conscientious of their carbon footprint. And one of those is actually in the film, that hotel in Norway. In our office, we only use recycled papers. Again, we use, oh yeah, and while we were filming, we never used any artificial lighting. We did everything with natural light. So we were constantly thinking, what can we do to leave the smallest carbon footprint we can? We took bottles with us, you know, glass bottles for water. You know, we never bought bottled water. We bought local foods if we could. We did everything, and we continue to try to do everything we possibly can to be true to the message that we are trying to send out there into the world. One of the things we did want to do is show you the trailer of the film, which was actually, Sven was talking about outreach, and one of the first things we had to do was create a website, which is www.seechange.net, if you haven't been there already. And our website had to attract people to the film before we were finished with it. So we did create a trailer to try to get attention, to try to get people to get excited about watching the film. And we employed, you know, obviously many of the things, the techniques that I mentioned before about you have to have sympathetic characters, you have to bring the underwater creatures to give them a human existence, a life. You have to have music that's compelling. And in the case of a trailer, you usually have to write things. You have to have written words because you really don't have enough time to have characters tell people what the story is about. So we thought we would just show you this very brief trailer so you can get a sense of desperately putting all those elements together in just a little over a minute.
There he is. You see it? There he is. It's huge.
Ocean chemistry is being altered on a scale not seen for millions of years.
The purpose of this journey is to find out some things about the world's oceans that I don't really understand.
The more acid we put in the ocean, fundamentally bad things will happen.
We might even see something that would remove humans from the planet.
I think that, you know, with all of these projects, film has taken us now 3.5 years. That's almost an undergraduate education. There are many challenges. There are many times when you wonder why in the world you're doing this. But without any question, the greatest reward for us has been the people we've met, the people who we've gotten to know, and the friends that have resulted. It's gone even beyond that. Barbara and I sometimes discuss why we're crazy enough to do these things. And we continue to say to each other, you know, if you have a chance to come back and do this over again, you want to come back as marine scientists. So we have become so taken with people we have met who work so hard for so little, expending so much time, energy, and often sacrifice to their families, that they are our real heroes, the marine scientists that we've gotten to know in the last 3.5 years. And we both thank them immensely for what they gave all of us. So with that, we'll do some questions and do our best to respond.
Simon party. But you have to speak a couple minutes longer.
I saw the film in the Seattle International Film Festival, and what impressed me when I saw it was that you were giving a very urgent, dire message, but you were giving it in a way that wasn't panicky, that people could listen to it. And so since then, I've been paying attention to the delivery of messages. And I think you succeeded, but I also find it very frustrating that unless you tell people in a way that, in this very gentle way, they won't listen. But I don't think that they're necessarily listening anyway. But if you didn't do that, they wouldn't listen at all. But I was wondering if you could kind of speak to that method of messaging.
There certainly are a lot of documentary films that are much more hard-hitting than ours, but they also cater to a very narrow audience. And I think our desire to reach a much larger audience and to reach across political aisles is what made us choose a softer approach. And also generationally, we wanted to reach all generations. I mean, my mother is not going to go see a hard-hitting documentary film. She's simply not going to do it. And it's just as important that she sees this film as it is somebody who's in college. So that really was our driving motivation for the way we made the film. And I think the fact that it still has a life. Most documentary films die within 6 months, maybe a year. This film still has a very, very active and healthy life, and this is 2 years later. And I do believe it's because we really made an effort not to alienate anyone, so people can talk about this. They can talk about the issue with each other, and they can talk about it very personally because it's an intimate and personal film. So I think that's why we took that route.
So there's a number of very powerful moments in the film. Thinking like if I think it was Jonathan's son that was talking about the glaciers in Alaska, and just kind of offhandedly says, yeah, of course there's not nearly as many as there used to be, and that really touches a lot of people. Were you aware of all these moments at the time you were putting this together, or were there any kind of surprises of moments that seemed to really resonate with people that you didn't expect?
That happened all the time. I mean, we never knew what to expect. We had no idea what anybody was going to say. So when people made statements like the one that Jeff made, we all get goosebumps. We look at each other. We've got a crew of 9 people standing around, and we all know that's one of those moments. And we all just take a look, and we think, okay, we're there. And that happened constantly. That's one of the joys of making documentary films. You really have no idea what anybody is going to say. You have a list of questions that you would love to have answered, but you don't know how they're going to be answered. You don't know if they're going to veer off into, a more personal response or reply. And sometimes you get nothing, but you often get just nuggets of gold. And those are what makes documentary filmmaking so worthwhile. It's extraordinary. People relax in front of a camera, especially when you're outside. So you tend to get, I think, answers that the people who are giving those answers are surprised they're giving. So there were many, many moments where we heard statements that we knew were going to make a profound difference in the making of the film.
I would just add to that, I think it's important that we use a very small camera, a little smaller than a loaf of bread, and as opposed to a camera the size of a suitcase. So it was not as intrusive, and I think once many people started speaking as part of a conversation, they became less and less conscious of the camera. When we asked Elias to participate, and he agreed to do so. He was 5 years old at the time. This is our grandson. We told him there's only one rule, Elias, that you have to follow, and that is you can never look into the lens. Never. That is simply a rule. He understood that. He never looked into the lens in the entire making of the film. We interviewed some politicians in Washington, D.C. We gave them the same rule. Not a single one of them could stay more than a nanosecond out of the lens, and we had to discard all that material. So These are the experiences that you have.
One of the beauties of your film, which I think is unique in the documentary, is that you had a beautiful story to tell and you told it extremely well. Did that evolve as you're doing the documentary? As you said just a minute ago, that you didn't know what people were going to say. But you must, did you have this story in mind all the way through? When did that come clear to you?
We had a basic story in mind, but yes, we didn't really know what kind of information we were going to get. So you really have to be a shapeshifter as a documentary filmmaker, because you don't know what's going to happen and you have to be willing to change direction at any time. But after we had shot about 3/4 of the footage, I think we had a good idea of what the storyline was going to be, but we plopped that footage on our editor's desk and said, please start putting this together. Let's see where the holes are, so that we can really build a complete story. And so we began really collaborating with the editor at about 3/4 of the way through the filming. And she would say, okay, I have this sequence works really beautifully, but we need to have this transition moment before we can go on. So we would say, okay, what would make a great transition moment? And we would go and create that for her. So it's really in the editing that the selection of, you know, those golden moments. We would say to Toby, our editor, this was an amazing moment, see if it works. And she may say, you know, that was awful, you're wrong. Or she'll say, that was really brilliant and that was great and we're going to be able to use it. We, of course, fell in love with everybody that we interviewed. So, you know, like you, Dick, and you, Chris, you know, these were long interviews, and we thought the whole thing was fascinating. I mean, we would have loved to show 2 hours of you guys talking, and we were thrilled. And then we would come home and show to friends, and it, you know, it obviously doesn't have the same impact on the friends who are not that interested in the topic. So cutting footage was very, very, very hard. And it's so important to have a great editor who hasn't been on the shoot, who hasn't fallen in love with everybody, who can say, you know, yeah, they're interesting, but this 3-second segment or this 1-minute segment is what we're going to use. But in terms of the story making and telling, it evolves as you go along. You go in with a general idea. That's how you can actually shoot. You know who your characters are going to be. You know that Sven is going to be the principal character, so all questions are addressed to him. You know that Elias is going to play a fundamental role, but the editor really goes in there and makes it all work, stitches it together.
I think the most nerve-wracking thing for us was, how was Elias going to be? He was 5 years old at the time. But I think it was very helpful, the fact that he had not seen television at that point in his life. He had never gone to a movie or seen a film other than David Attenborough in his endless viewings of the Blue Planet series. And as a result, as far as we can determine, he was never self-conscious around the camera or in the process of being in the film. I think if he had been someone with more television exposure or film exposure, the likelihood of his being that relaxed and free, and I think he comes across that way, would have been much less. So we were very fortunate there. That was a big variable. Brad?
You've offered some advice to scientists about do work with filmmakers, and I'm completely with you. But I also remember that when I met you, my big concern was that you would not be who you are. That you would be some of the kinds of filmmakers I've met and regretted. And I wonder if you can offer any advice to go with that about how to pick who you work with. You're going to work with people in media, and you've got something that matters in your hands. I mean, I can't tell you how big a relief it was that it was you guys who showed up for this.
I mean, I think you find your favorite movies and find out who made those favorite movies, because it kind of gets down to style and substance and how the stories are told. And I think you literally say, this movie I love more than any other movie, and this is the person I'd like to work with, and then call them and see if they're interested in the topic that you're involved with. Or if they approach you look them up, call us, we'll tell you secrets. Yes.
I was wondering how you sort of got involved in making documentaries in the first place, and kind of you started tricking yourself into getting involved.
Exactly. I started as a still photographer in New York City. I went to the International Center of Photography, and I worked a lot with the theater, and I worked with nonprofit organizations, and I did a lot of portrait work. And it was really the point at which I had one body of work that I had been working on for many, many years, which was portraits of the woman that raised me, essentially my nanny from North Carolina, South Carolina. And they were lovely photographs, but I realized at a certain point that what would make them far more interesting was her voice telling her own story. So a friend of mine was raised by a German nanny, and she was interested in doing the same kind of project. And when we were much, much younger, we got on a plane and went to Sundance to meet filmmakers and to watch films and to see whether this was something we could do. And lo and behold, I'd say 80% of the filmmakers that were presenting that year were women in their late 20s, early 30s, and we just turned to each other and said, we can do this. So I had a background in the still image, in photography. She was an actress and had done some advertisements, so she had some knowledge of how these things work. But we were smart enough to understand that the best thing to do would be to hire the most talented people we could find in the field who would train us and teach us with this first movie. So we made a film called Martha and Ethel, which ended up at Sundance, which was picked up by Sony Pictures Classics and did very well. So I was spoiled from day one. I thought that would happen again and again. But it's been a great, great journey, but that's how I got into it. And then I dragged my husband into it. He had no choice.
I have a question. We've had a lot of talks about science and messaging and media, and it seems to me, having gone through the speakers, a lot of the papers we've been given to read, that when you look at the science, there are definitely some things like pteropods that are going to be badly affected, and other things that maybe are going to be positively affected. And there's in amongst the science, there's a sense that some things are going to do well and some things are going to do badly, and there's quite a bit of uncertainty. And then when you get to watching your movie, it's a much more of a sort of single message. And when you get to the short preview, then it's all of the dire warnings. And when you get to the poster, it's imagine a world without fish. So the sort of, do you get a sense that when you're going from the world of science, where there's a lot of nuance and people not willing to say anything definite, to what is the final message, you just sort of, I don't know, sort of shepherded into wanting to say, what is our 5-word message that says something bold?
Well, it's a very good question. We have tried, we've done, I don't know, 130 Q&As and presentations and discussions over the last 18 months. We are very careful, more so than we were in the trailer, about making any bold categorical statements. Perhaps as we've taken a little distance, we've been increasingly humbled by the complexity as we've learned more. But we also understand very clearly that this is not a science film. We really set out to make a film about legacy and the oceans and the fact that the oceans were being changed. By the time we finished making the film, we really felt that the central piece wasn't really legacy, it was the moral imperative of having to do something. And we've been trying to continue to get the message out to pique people's curiosity so they will learn more. We're often asked, well, what can we do? And we talk about conservation, we talk about choices that people make, we talk about becoming part of various communities that are concerned about the condition of the natural world, or degradation of conditions within the natural world. We increasingly, instead of beating people over the head, are really saying, join us in this inquiry that we have started with this film into better understanding, especially this, 70% of the surface of the globe, 200 million square kilometers of area, this vast thing we refer to as our oceans, without which we could not survive, and help move forward with us in the fundamental understanding that in order to have sustainable life on Earth, we need to have healthy, living oceans. That's really sort of the bottom line that we try to communicate. So you don't see us, or you don't hear us talking about the end of fish or extinctions of large numbers. I will let you in on a secret, and that is that we didn't have a trailer, and it's hard to make a 60-second trailer that sort of catches your imagination. And we have a neighbor who lives up the road from us who has an ad agency in New York City. And he said, give me some of that footage. He said, I've got a young editor who cuts for MTV. He said, I will get him to throw something together. And that's the origin of that trailer. So that's the MTV take on ocean acidification.
And that's exactly the sense I got from watching the movie. The trailer gives a different message, I would say. And having gone through this as a scientist myself, you publish some work and journalists phone you, and they don't want to know what the complexity is of your science. They want to know what are the 10 most dire things you can say about it. What are the most bold, least uncertain thing you can say about your work. And it's very tough to say that.
No, we're often asked things like, when will the last fish expire? The date, please. Give me the date.
There's time for one more question.
We certainly want to tell friends to see the film. Is it available widely through the usual? I mean, is there a DVD, Netflix, iTunes?
Go to our website, www.seachange.net, like fishing net, and it's for sale on the website. And the reason you might ask why we do that instead of Netflix or Amazon, it's to continue to generate revenue so we can do outreach. It's selling for $19.95 on the website, and every single penny of that goes right back into outreach to get the word back out there. I know that somebody over in China has put it up on the internet, so it's also out there on the internet. So you never know about these things, but we're not as concerned as probably we should be about those kinds of things, because if people pirate it and just get more people to see it, so be it.
Well, I just want to say a very personal thank you. Dick always has the last word.
Are you more optimistic now than you were when you first started?
I know more now, and sadly, knowing more, I think I have a more nuanced understanding of the challenges we face. I also have spent more time in Washington, D.C., meeting with congressmen, meeting with people who work for senators and congressmen, and I understand the degree of paralysis within the Beltway. What I often say to audiences is, I think we're going to be able to move on this when a green electron is cheaper than a brown electron. Now, having said that, I'm sure somebody in the audience says it already is if you factor in all the externalities, and of course that's true. but that isn't the way we've been operating, and in most people's mindset, we're still not operating that way. But, you know, I become very hopeful when I see things that are happening down in Silicon Valley. I'm hopeful when I see things that are happening in Europe, particularly Northern Europe. I'm very excited when I read, as I did 2 days ago in the online edition of the New York Times, that a member of the inner circle of the leadership in China announced that their patterns of development are unsustainable, and they have to closely now begin to assess the environmental impact of their current business as usual practices and ask what they can do to address pollution and environmental degradation. To hear that from the Chinese leadership is, I would say, an extension of the decision that President Hu made last September when he said we have 30 days, and within 30 days we're going to close the 2,000 largest polluters in China. They included power plants, they included cement factories, and they included steel mills. These corporations were told that if they wanted to continue operating, they would have to avail themselves of best practices, of the R&D that was currently being funded, and with then permits, they would be able to come back online. That got very little publicity in this country. Within 30 days, those 2,000 operations were closed. And you know, China is not the silver bullet in my mind, but I know that at the top levels, they are wrestling very seriously with these issues and these problems. That is, the challenges of looking eye to eye at a high CO2 world. So, you know, we all, as industrialized nations especially, have to be sharing that stage with them and looking very hard at what we're doing and the impact short-term and long-term.
Well, thank you very much.